Okay, Neil, you've been in post now for the last 2 weeks. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what your role is at the club?
Yeah, no problem. So, as you quite rightly say, I've been in role now a couple of weeks. I joined the club in November as club secretary, working part-time whilst I was carrying on my full-time day job. And my previous career has all been in senior retail operations. I recently did a sports law degree based out of the Etihad Stadium at the University College of Football and Business, with an intention then to come and work into football. So I had the opportunity in November to come in as a secretary, and then that morphed into moving into the role as CEO and club secretary at the club. So at the moment I do carry on those dual roles at this time.
Brilliant. So we're going to look first of all, we're going to do it section by section. So we'll talk first of all a bit about the FA sanctions and the behind closed doors games. So can you tell us a bit more about what the FA sanctions were and what it means for the football club and what impact it's had?
Yeah, so everyone will know it's been well documented. We've had these 2 games behind closed doors played, and obviously it was quite unprecedented from a point of view of no grounds have really been closed for a number of years, and it seemed to come across to the fans that it was obviously excessive. Now, I think what everyone needs to understand first of all, so in my role as club secretary, it's my job to be across all the rules that are around football and governance. And what you see is, having come in November, I wasn't here before for a lot of the instances that have gone on, but if you look at it from a cold hard light of day and you look at what's happened, we have over a 17-18 month period had a number of charges laid at us by the FA. And a lot of those charges come under rule what you call E20 or E21, and feel free to look these up on the FA's website. And these are all around crowd behaviour. And especially it will get heightened if you reach an E21.4, which is an aggravated crowd behaviour. And that's when it involves something like racism, homophobia, any of what you'd call the high-level subjects, which are very topical at the moment. And we have a duty as a football club to make sure our fans behave in the way that they should do. And the FA will hold the club accountable for that. So whether it's just a 1 fan or the 2 fans, at the end of the day, we're lucky to have roughly 3,000 fans who come to us. However, we're playing non-league football, but really we've got a league stadium. So you go around most non-league grounds, you've got standing, you can move around the ground as you go around and you can drink. We can't really move around where we're in a seat. We can drink, but we're comparable to a size of a League 2 club. So in a normal League 2 club, you might get 2,500, 3,000 fans and you won't be able to drink. And obviously alcohol sometimes affects people's judgment. So ultimately, over this 18-month period, we've had a lot of sanctions laid at us, from throwing flares onto the pitch, from crowds coming onto the pitch, from people shouting or abusing lineswomen, etc. And the FA have a very clear policy on it. They're just not prepared to accept that kind of behaviour, and as such, they will give you the strictest possible sanctions. So the latest one that we had that was behind 2 games behind closed doors, it was just a fact of, when you're independently looking at this, and I attended an FA hearing for 3 or 4 hours, when you're sat there looking at this on the cold light of day on a sheet of paper, there is a number of charges laid at us over a period of time, and ultimately it came to the stage where a fine wasn't going to be no longer enough. So they applied the 2 game behind closed doors, and on top of that, I think it would be remiss of me not to say that we have still got a game that is suspended, hanging over us till September. So ultimately, if we have any more crowd trouble that's under code E20, E21, then ultimately we could end up with having that suspension kicked back in, or worse still, a points deduction. And we already know as fans and as a club, we've already had 3 points deducted towards the start of the season, and obviously with form going as it's been lately, that 3 points could really be costly, and we could have more points if we don't start switching on to the behaviours that are expected. So what we will put out on this video is the link to the FA grassroots football policy. It's quite a lengthy document, but it gives fans a chance to read up on what the expectations are and what you can be charged with.
Thanks for that, Neil. So how has those behind closed doors games affected the revenue of the club?
So, I mean, we'll probably touch on this later when we maybe do a section on ticketing, but effectively straight away, instead of getting a fine when you get the FA charge sheet through, which talks about £100 low tier, medium or high tier being £400, we've obviously gone outside of these sanctions now. And what that's meant is, instead of the FA just giving us a fine, which for argument's sake, 30, 40, 50,000, what they've done is instead is it's behind closed doors. So we've lost all our potential revenue streams, ticket sales that came across. And obviously now we've got a hole in the budget and it's how we replace that. And then that goes on to some of the ticketing discussions that have been happening across social media, which I'll touch on in our ticketing conversation. But yeah, first and foremost, it's a big hole in the budget. And secondly, obviously 2 games behind closed doors, and we've had a loss and a draw, so it's clearly affected the atmosphere in the stadium that we could have generated as well. So we've been double whammied.
What does it mean for the club going forward?
Well, what it means for the club going forward is we need to be on best behaviour watch. We've got this suspended game hanging over us. We need all the fans to realise that, come and support your team, be vocal, be noisy, but ultimately we've got to behave within the guidelines. Otherwise, this game that's hanging over suspended will be kicked in, and ultimately that'll be another game behind closed doors, which potentially this season or next season. So I'd really put a passionate plea out there to fans to say, the world's changed. We're not in the 90s anymore. Things have moved on, and things that you might have said in the 90s or the 80s, we can no longer say. We can't discriminate against people, whether it's the colour of the skin, whether they're on the trans or anything else. We can't discriminate. We need to treat everyone as an equal and make sure we're displaying those behaviours when we come to football.
So in the area of the South Stand, there's currently some covers on some of the seating. Can you tell us when those covers will be removed and how will fans be able to manoeuvre around the South Stand?
Yeah, so we had to put some measures in place as a result of what's happened, because ultimately if we didn't put measures in place or be seen to put something in place, we're leaving ourselves wide open in the future. So we took a football board decision to put those first 3 rows with black covers on, because ultimately what's happening is, especially in the South Stand, is when obviously goals are going in, people are then filtering forward or trying to potentially, in some cases, encroach the pitch. So we need to try and stop that happening. The only way of doing it was to put those covers on there. Now it has worked. You could argue results haven't been as positive lately, so there's not been as much to celebrate. However, it seems to have worked short term. It's something that we'll keep in place short term and maybe review at the end of the season. But the other ask that I'd ask of the fans is that where you have got that corner in the South Stand, people tend to congregate on about the 85th minute. They're coming out of the seat and they're standing in that empty space in the corner. Now, I can probably understand that if we had 20,000 and you're trying to get a quick getaway, but ultimately there's no need for us to leave our seats until the full-time whistle, unless you're going to then walk out the stadium after the 85th minute. But congregating on that big corner for 5 minutes all stood in a crowd is probably not helping our cause, because ultimately if we get a last minute winner, those fans are probably going to try and probably pile in towards the pitch. It's not going to help.
So a lot of the fans on social media and in the pubs and bars around Bury think that the punishment that we've had this season has been unfair. So especially when you're kind of seeing what's happened at some of the other clubs in, I won't mention them, but in the FA Cup matches. As a club, what are our views on this kind of level of punishment, and what are our views on how other teams are kind of being managed? Yeah,
so I think we do think it was excessive, and I think we've come out and said that. We were obviously gutted to have a 2 game behind closed doors. We would have hoped it would have been much less, or some other punishments such as shutting one of the stands maybe. However, it wasn't. I think it's really important not to adopt a victim mentality. We need to ensure that we're doing what we can with our camp. It's all right looking at other games and saying, why is that not happening to them? But ultimately, in order to say that, we need to be whiter than white ourselves. So only can we look at and challenge the FA on what's happening with other clubs when we've got our own house in order. And as we've already documented, our own house hasn't been in order. So I think let's focus on that first of all, before we probably start looking at other clubs.
Okay, we're going to move on to some questions about the pitch. Obviously there's been a lot of to and froing over the last couple of months about that. So can you provide an update firstly around the state of the pitch at the minute, and why so many games have actually been called off at Gig?
Yeah. So I think we've had 6 or 7 games now called off at Gig, which obviously presents a lot of challenges, byproducts of that, i.e. the catering getting affected, calling games off at late notice, etc., affecting the fans. But I think just to try and just focus on the pitch first of all, we have to understand that when we came back to this stadium, that pitch hadn't been touched for about 3 years. So it had nothing done to it whatsoever. Now, obviously, I wasn't here at the start of the season, so it's hard to completely discuss it. But what I'll say is, having spoke to the groundsman, is that at the start of the season, we were challenged with the remedial works that we wanted to carry out, ultimately because we were getting some charity games on at the time, my understanding is, and we were trying to get more and more games on to bring in revenue for the club. But ultimately, the pitch wasn't ready for that. And what that meant is we took off the pitch a top layer of about 12 mil, when really we'd want to take off 25 mil. So what's happening now is the water is getting stuck within the ground. So there's been a lot of chatter on social media about, why aren't you getting the covers on when you know it's going to rain, etc. Because sometimes that wouldn't affect it, because the water is held within the moisture. And when we put a cover over it, all that will do is the water will come up from that top bit and it will surface over the top. So when you actually take the covers off, there's still water on the ground. So, I know it's a passionate subject and fans want games on, and trust me, as a club, we want games on as well. But there's only so much the groundsman can do with the conditions that he's got. So, it's not a case of us not supporting him. We give him what he needs to give. Over the next few days, we are spending some money on some considerable pitch repairs. So hopefully you should see that by the time we come back in against Wythenshawe on the Saturday. But I think the groundsman's had a bit of a hard rap, if I'm being fair. He is doing what he can and we are supporting him as much as we can. It's just that action that should have been taken way before the start of this season what wasn't done enough, and now we've got to put up with the legacy of that.
Okay, so games have been called off very early during the day, especially for night matches, sometimes early as 1 p.m. Can you explain why that is and why we've had to cancel games at, so early on in the day?
Yeah, I mean, this is always a contentious point, because depending who your general fan is, people take the days off work, they take evenings off work to come to games. We have people travelling from 3 or 4 hours away. It's very hard to appease every single fan, is what I'd say. So I don't call games off, or I don't call games off myself. I rely on the groundsman. So the process is very clear. The groundsman will come to me and say, Neil, I think there's a problem with the pitch. From that point, I'll say, do you think we need a pitch inspection? He will then give me a yes or no, and then I contact and try and find the referee. Now, I will be completely honest and transparent about the process. The referees we're trying to get have full-time jobs. So when you're trying to get a referee to come down and give you a pitch inspection, most of them are busy between the hours of 9 and 5. So generally, when you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, we want a pitch inspection at 2 o'clock if it's absolutely like a bog, and it's probably going to be called off. Some of those cases, we've not been able to get a referee over here till after 5 o'clock. That's just the simple mechanics of where we are. They don't even get paid for those pitch inspections. So, to try and get someone in is increasingly difficult. However, where I can make an earlier decision, so as in we've just made one a few days ago, it was clear we had some concerns potentially the night before. We played second half and it continuously rained, which cut the pitch up even more. We then had a period of wet weather overnight. And I know that during Tuesday, it was bright sunshine and there was a lot of chatter on social media about how can this game be off, but the damage was already done. And when I say, trust me, we need the games on, and everyone did everything they could. But like I said, we won't appease everyone. Some fans want it to call in later, some fans are travelling a long distance and want it call in earlier. We just try and do the best for everyone at the time with the tools that we've got.
Okay, can you give us a bit of an update on the 3G pitch and when or if we will see it being implemented?
Yeah, so just had a couple of phone calls this afternoon over this. So we're 99% of the way there now in terms of getting this 3G pitch delivered, which is obviously good news because we've had all these games off, and with a 3G pitch, obviously that won't happen because we'll make sure we got all games on. I think the 3G pitch has many advantages. First of all, we can get all our teams playing on there. So that's women's, under 23s, and some of our other vets teams and things we've got out there. Secondly, we can have up to around 50 hours playing on this pitch every week. So it enables us to roll out and use the pitch for communities and get community initiatives involved. We can get grants, we can get certain fundings. And on top of that as well, obviously, when you're getting more eyes on our pitch, that enables potentially increase in, things like sponsorship and commercial deals because you've got more eyes around the perimeter of your pitch because you've got more people coming. And then hopefully that translates into more people coming on a match day. Now, again, I think some of the questions I was asked in some of the questions that were sent in is why not a 4G or 5G pitch if they're the latest things? And The basic answer to that is there's a myth that 4G and 5G pitches exist and they're different to 3. Realistically, it's more of a marketing ploy. And to be fair, the only signed off accredited FA pitches are the 3G pitches. So it wasn't a case of we've tried to not spend as much money or get a 4G or 5G. It's that they don't really exist and they're not accredited anyway. So we had to go with the best of what we could get.
And what impact is that going to have on pre-season, for example, things like friendlies at Gig Lane? Obviously, if we're getting a 3G pitch installed, will they be able to happen, or will we have to miss out and wait till the league season kicks off?
Yeah, so I think this is quite a difficult point, because ultimately, in an ideal world, we'd finish top of the league, be promoted, and the day of the last game, the following day, we could get the pitch ripped up and start on the 3G. Now, ultimately, if we end up in the playoffs, that's going to delay that process for 2 weeks, and then that has a knock-on as well for the start of next season. So we haven't got any firm dates yet. However, what I can tell you is that pre-season there won't be any home friendlies at Gig Lane, because regardless it'll just be too tight to get them in. So we're in the process of organising some away friendly fixtures. Hopefully it won't be needed that we need to organise some first few games of the season away as well, but nothing can be confirmed on that yet because we don't know what dates we're working to. But hopefully we can start the season, whichever division we're in, on time and at Gig Lane.
Okay, next section we're looking at club initiatives. So what initiatives can we expect during your tenure at Gig Lane?
Yeah, well, I guess some of these maybe might not be initiatives, but we're obviously working to try and get the main stand fully open and operational, and extend the safe certificate for how many fans we can have in. I've had some initial conversations last week around getting a fan zone, so where you come out the front of the stadium on the far side. We're looking at maybe trying to do something with a fan zone there, so we're going to be working for some graphic designers early doors and maybe involve a couple of fans groups on and trying to draw that up when we've got a bit further down the line. And that will look like, you might have franchises there, you might have some food stalls, you might have some a big screen showing the early 12:30 kickoff, all with the aim of getting fans earlier down to the game, creating an atmosphere and the game becoming an actual event in itself as a day, as it does with some other football grounds. Obviously at the moment it's you pretty much turn up for the game and then you might go into Starkey's afterwards, but then you're going home. We want to make it more of an experience. There'll obviously be a cost to doing that, but all this is based with trying to increase capacity at Gig Lane, get more fans through the door and create a really good atmosphere for the players. So the two main things I'm looking at the moment is fan experience, but also communication with the fans. So as you said at the start, I've only been enrolled 2 weeks now. I want to make sure this becomes a monthly forum, so there will be an address you can send questions into. I don't want to be drawn on things that have gone on before my time, or maybe some of the politics that have gone on. What I can talk about is I'm here to run the day-to-day football operations, and I'm quite happy to answer questions around that. And as I always say, if anyone sees me in the stands and wants to come and speak to me or answer me any questions, absolutely feel free.
Okay, so you mentioned there about the opening up of the main stand. My worry, and I think a lot of other people's worries is that Gig Lane in the past has been kind of like quite empty, with 2,500, 3,000 fans scattered around the whole stadium. So will that have an impact on the atmosphere by opening up the main stand in full? Because I know being kind of congregated in the south stand, a lot of concentrated supporters together does make for a better atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately we want the best atmosphere for fans when they come to the ground. We've done some initiatives and tried at some games where we've had a better speaker system installed, so we can talk to fans more and almost have a pre-match build-up, as you'll get with a lot of other football grounds, in a set routine, if you like, the last 15 minutes. But our intention when we're talking about opening up the main stand fully, as long as we're signed off from a health and safety point of view, is the whole intention here is to grow our fan base. So whereas I probably understand those initial concerns around it being more fragmented, ultimately we want to get more fans down to Gig Lane, and at the moment we are slightly restricted what we can do due to the amount of people we can let in. So yeah, 3,000 fans over 3 whole stands, I completely get your point, but we want to be getting to the stage where we're getting 5,000, 6,000 fans. And I think having community initiatives, whether it's for a fan zone, whether it's kids can come down and have a bit of a PlayStation tournament before match, and offering all these different things for all different categories of fans will make sure that we increase the total fan number at Gig.
Okay, thank you. Starkey's has been a real popular addition since it opened. And is there any kind of, I know we're restricted on how many people can get into Starkey's. So is there any kind of plans to extend any possible drinking areas? Obviously you mentioned the fan zone. And also, what's the kind of current status with the renting of Starkey's as a facility?
Okay, so yeah, Starkey's has been really popular, and first of all, just want to thank the people that put the time into getting that up and running. Certainly, John Wiggins spent a lot of his own time and energy getting that up and running. But obviously, you start something off which is it grows legs. It's got a capacity of 110 people. We can only get so many in there. We don't currently ticket it, so in other words, you know, anyone can go in there after the game, and it soon reaches capacity. It's almost a victim of its own success. And obviously we're pushed for space around here, so we want to keep fans in the stadium after the games, you know, to chew the fat, talk about the game, you know, have a pint with the friends, etc. There's no immediate plans to extend Starkey's because, again, that's a space issue. However, if we do get the fan zone up and running, then that will obviously, people can go into there as well. And then don't forget, we have got the 1885, you know, hospitality, which we're currently reviewing the offering that we have in there and maybe getting some new crowds into that area as well.
Okay, when I first started coming to gig, there was standing areas. In fact, I think 3 sides of the ground was standing areas a long time ago. Is there any sort of notion to kind of revert back to some sort of terracing, safe standing areas for fans? Because I know that is something that we could do as a fan base to kind of get behind the team. Is there any, you know, anything like that in the balance?
Yeah, I think the way to look at this is you go around, and I visited quite a few non-league grounds, and effectively those grounds that are visited have mainly been always non-league grounds. We're almost working in reverse, that we were a league club and now we're non-league. So anything we now do will always have a cost to it. So even though we might say, okay, we want to change one of the ends to just standing to create a better atmosphere, to give fans a choice, ultimately to do that, you're going to have to start ripping up a load of seating, changing the stand requirements, making sure it fits health and safety, getting council sign off, and it all costs money. So at the moment, you know, it's just the easier choice of, okay, we just won't open that stand because we're not getting the appropriate crowd. But, you know, I won't rule anything out, you know, further down the line. But in order to do all this, you need good revenue coming in, and in order to do that, you need good crowds coming in. Okay,
we're going to move on to ticketing now. So one of the first questions that have come in is, why don't we segregate home fans and away fans?
Yeah, so this was a question I probably had when I first came to the club, not fully understanding non-league as much as I do when I probably support Premier League, etc. But ultimately, there's no requirement in non-league because it's meant to be more that, you know, jovial, family sort of atmosphere. You get lower crowds. Everything's built in the lower leagues. Let's be honest, for lower crowds. The average crowd in this division is 300. You know, there's no real need to segregate. However, what we've obviously come across lately is that we've had some crowd issues, as I've spoken about before, and now there is the question of, should we segregate? Now that comes down to sometimes a financial element. You know, if we played Lower Breck and they only bring 20 fans and we give them a stand, we've got to steward that stand. We've got to make sure there's a kiosk open to serve food. We've got to make sure the toilets and everything's clean, etc. And sometimes that isn't viable just to do it. So I think it's one we need to, certainly with the charges we've had laid us, I think it's one we need to look at closely and consider. There will be some times where I think, where it may be a local derby, for example, where it will only be prudent to segregate. But to have it as a carte blanche policy moving forward, I don't think would work.
Have you got any messages out there for the fans? I know that there is kind of talk about division and how maybe we're not as united as we once were. What is your kind of vision on moving forward as a fan base, and what can you do for us and what can we do for you?
Ultimately, what I'd say is whatever's gone on in the past now has happened. Certain things have been voted in, certain elections have happened. You may not always agree with that, but the question you've got to ask yourself as a fan is, can you put it to one side and get behind the team for the greater good of the team? I know a lot of these fans who talk about things on social medias, you know, there is still that division that can sometimes be there. What we now need is, as a club, is a united front moving forward. And as with any walk of life, you have to make a conscious decision. putting things to one side and can you move forward? We need everyone who's attending Gig Lane to be in the right mentality, to be supporting the team and to get behind everyone in the operation here. Although it does appear on the face of it like we are, we should be in League Two, for example, with our stadium, I think it's only important for me to mention that there's only 3 people employed full-time at this football club, and that is myself, a stadium manager and assistant stadium manager. Everyone else is a volunteer. It takes 85 volunteers we have to get games on here at Gig, and they do a fantastic and amazing job. So I want to say thank you to them, led by the brilliant Sam Harmon. Now, ultimately, although sometimes it may feel that you're not getting a quicker answer as you want to if you get an email in or something, you have to consider that the only person here to answer it effectively is me. And every time I'm potentially trying to answer individual queries, it's taking me away from doing the wider things. So what I hope to do is, what I'd ask is, I'm trying to do these forums, and I'm going to get a fans forum up and running hopefully, but I'm trying to do these videos to have a clear communication with you all so I can talk to you about what's going on. We'll have that open dialogue, we'll allow the questions to come in, we'll put them in sections and I can actually talk to you. But like I said at the start, the best thing you can do is, if you want to know something, just come and grab me. You'll see me in the stand, you'll see me walking around, you'll see me in the team there. As long as it's done in the right way, we'll be open and we'll answer questions. But what I can't do is get drawn into pre-2023 before I was even here, and be talking about some of the politics, whether it's over the lease of the stadium, whether it's over the ground. I really can't get drawn into those conversations because it will stop me from doing what I'm here to do, which is to communicate with you, to provide a great fan experience, to get a great footballing products on the pitch, and do our best to support Dave McNabb and make sure we get this team promoted. So I guess my final point on this would just be the games recently, the results haven't gone the way any of us would have wanted, but we are absolutely committed, 100% behind Dave and the players. We absolutely believe we can get up. If we have to do it the hard way out of playoffs, we will absolutely do it that way, and we will make sure we're promoted and out of this division. So come down Easter weekend, be loud, be proud. Let's get a great crowd in. Let's try and break our record. I think it was 4,900 something on there we got on Boxing Day. Let's try and get over 5,000. Let's get down here, support Dave and the team, create as much noise and make it as intimidating for Wythenshawe as it possibly can.